So some of you out there have probably heard of the website called Kickstarter. And if you haven't, I'm going to try to explain it real quick. So Kickstarter is a website that does crowdfunding. What's crowdfunding, you might ask, and why is it important to me as a tabletop gamer? Well, I'll explain why. Crowdfunding is when, instead of going to a bank or an investor or a group of investors or finding a pot of gold, you want to make a product. Instead of having to go talk to those people or dig for that pot of gold, you instead talk to the public, the people who would be interested in your product. And you get them to give you money, they pledge, before you actually produce it. How do you do that? First, you sign up at Kickstarter, which is owned by Amazon, so it's not a fly-by-night sort of situation. You get a Kickstarter account. Usually it's best if you make a video explaining what you're doing, show off prototype designs, images of what it's going to look like, whatever. And this doesn't have to be just like a physical gadget or a product. It could be, I've seen music albums from bands up there, books, role-playing game books, any kind of book, novels, whatever. Anything that you can get people interested in and get them to pledge money, you can do at Kickstarter. So what happens? As the users out there who are interested in the product, they pledge money. You usually have pledge levels. You say, well, for my role-playing book, if you pledge $25, when I get it done, I'll ship it to you for free. 25 bucks, there's your book, boom. $50, you're going to get a PDF and the book and your name in the book and a free map or whatever. There's all kinds of different things. Sometimes the pledges get really crazy and huge. For $5,000, I will come to your house and DM a game for 3 hours, blah, 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 you know, that kind of stuff. Obviously, most people don't necessarily go for those real high ones, but there have been, you know, some notable Kickstarters, even in gaming, in the past. So what happens is you have to build a goal as the person who's doing the Kickstarter. You say, if I can raise $4,000, I can produce this role-playing book or whatever. You usually have between 30 and 45 days to hit that goal. If you don't hit that goal, if the pledges don't, you know, meet that goal or surpass it, basically it's no harm, no foul. The people who pledged, they don't get charged until the goal is achieved on the date when the Kickstarter ends. And you don't really lose anything. You didn't cost anything to sign up other than your time to get everything all set up. So again, like I said, no harm, no foul. But if you make your goal, then Kickstarter will take their percentage, which I've heard, I believe, is 9%, and then you, as the person running the Kickstarter, get your money, and now you need to produce the product and ship it out to the people and all that kind of stuff. The thing that's good about Kickstarter is it allows small, kind of odd, for lack of a better word, products to get produced that normally in the regular market would never make it to the light of day. Case in point, this is a bag of dice that I purchased. I like to play a game called Dust Warfare. In Dust Warfare, the dice that come with the game are black, and they have 4 blank sides and 2 sides with crosshair circle symbols on them, and that's how you know whether you hit or miss. But the game is World War II, so you've got Axis, you've got Allies, and you've got these kind of Soviets and whatnot. This company called Ironheart Artisans made dice, and they are green ones with stars for the Allies. They've got gray ones with crosses on them for the Axis, and they also made red ones with the little circle or the hammer and sickle. I didn't get any of those because I really only play Allies and the Axis. It would have been very difficult for them to sit down and produce these and hope that people were interested without knowing. That's one of the things that crowdsourcing or crowdfunding does for you. You know at least this many people are interested. So you know, I've made my goal, we're going to produce it, we're going to ship it, it's going to be great. Another thing that's good about Kickstarter is the ability for not just the small niche companies to get in on making actual products and shipping them to people, but also for bigger companies to be able to use it sort of as a, for lack of a better term, almost a pre-order or maybe a let's try it and see. Mantic Games out of England, who produces a bunch of different games, has been very successful on Kickstarter. And they've produced, that I can think of off the top of my head, Dreadball, which was kind of their sort of Blood Bowl sci-fi kind of sports miniatures game that did very, very well for them on Kickstarter. I know they did Warpath stuff on Kickstarter. I know they did Kings of War stuff on Kickstarter. Most recently, they did something called Dead Zone, which is a kind of tabletop skirmish game that also came not just with figures, but also with the mat, and also came with three-dimensional plastic terrain that you could put together. So the game is played in multiple dimensions. It's not just played flat on the tabletop. I was not super interested, but I thought the terrain was really cool. Turns out a couple days after I first saw it, they put up a new pledge level that said, hey, if you just want to pay this much money and pledge this much, we'll just ship you a giant box of terrain. And then you don't have to have the game, you can just have the terrain. Evidently, other people besides me said, hey, I would really love the terrain, but I don't want the rest of the game. So, a couple weeks ago, I got this giant box filled with different pieces of modular terrain that I'm going to start putting together, gluing together. Got bulkheads and all kinds of cool sci-fi walls and walkways and other shenanigans. Came in a giant cardboard box. There's no instructions, but that's okay. I got a lot of stuff for a decent amount of money, and I didn't have to buy the whole game. It's another thing you're not going to see in a normal situation where we produce a game and sell it through distribution and it ends up in your friendly local game store. This situation really makes things for the manufacturer and for the niche audience that it might be aimed at really kind of nice. There are, however, some downsides to Kickstarter. One of the biggest ones is timeliness. Just because a company says, hey, if we get this to go through and we hit our goal, we're going to ship it September of 2013. Just because they say that doesn't mean that they will necessarily hit that date. And kind of a small problem with Kickstarter and other types of crowdfunding sites, there's no mechanism to say, hey, if you don't hit your date, we're going to fine you, or anything along those lines. As you go into a Kickstarter, you have to understand, and they explain this on the website, just because they say they're going to do this doesn't necessarily mean they're going to do it on time. There may be some other issues. It may be laziness. It may be manufacturing problems. They may have every interest in getting the product to you on the date that they said they want to, but it just might not happen. So you have to, as the pledgist, anyway, you as the person who's going to be dropping the money if this thing actually hits goal, you have to understand the date is almost completely arbitrary. They will say, oh, we're going to ship it by this date. It happens. Mantic is usually pretty good about hitting real close to their date, maybe a couple of weeks of slippage. I just received a game that made it real big on Kickstarter. It was their original goal was to raise $30,000. They raised $920-some thousand. It was a game called Ogre, made by Steve Jackson Games. They were 15 months late with the game. The date that it said when I originally pledged, they said it was going to ship September of 2012. Due to manufacturing problems in China and this and that and the other thing and all this stuff, I didn't get my game until I think November of of 2013. These problems, there's really no solution at this point, and you just have to understand, if you think to yourself, boy, I'm going to get this Kickstarter, and they say they're going to ship it in September, and that's good because I want to give it to someone as a birthday present in October, you are probably going to get screwed because it's probably not going to make its ship date. Some of them are starting to get a little bit more realistic about ship dates, but not all of them. So just keep that in mind. Why, as a tabletop miniatures person, should you care? I'll tell you. Mainly, it's because of the odd sort of niche products and games that you're not going to find anyplace else. These are things that you will find when you go to look at things on Kickstarter. Like I said, these terrain pieces from Mantic. This is not something that I would have expected them to produce and just sell on their website. They would have said, well, we'll sell you the game that comes with these pieces, but, we have to ship them properly and all that stuff. But because it was through Kickstarter, they said, well, if we have enough people who tell us up front, this is what we want, a whole big box of pieces of terrain, then we'll just make a bunch of extra terrain and we'll ship it to them, and it'll be great. Things like the dice here for Dust Warfare. That's a very specific niche product. Nobody else wants those dice except for people who play Dust Tactics and Dust Warfare, because they're not really useful. They don't have numbers on them. So those types of things, I have seen neat products for replacing different models from different game systems. There's a wall that a lot of people like to use in a game called Warhammer 40K. It's called Aegis Defense Wall. And the thing about the Aegis Defense Wall, it's a great piece to have in your army, but it really looks very Imperial. So if you're running Tau or you're running Eldar, you don't have a wall that looks like your army. It looks like you guys stole this from the Space Marines or the Imperial Guard and plunked it down in front of your army, which, you know, maybe you did, who knows. But there's a lot of people that are saying, well, why don't they make an Eldar one? Or why don't they make a Tau one? Or something like that. There have been several manufacturers out there who have gone through Kickstarter to produce those types of things, and they find out, well, this many people actually, yes, do want it, so we'll ship it to them once we get it finished, because now we've got the money to produce it, and we're all set. Table War and Frontline Gaming have recently just finished a big Kickstarter on big printed gaming mats, which look amazing. And that one was very successful for them, and that's going to be getting a ton of really nice looking gaming mats out to a whole bunch of gamers out there all across the world. And the nice thing is that that probably wouldn't have worked if it hadn't been for Kickstarter, because they would have had to come up with all that money up front and gone through that, and gone and found a manufacturer and do all this stuff. But because they knew we can talk to the manufacturer, get prices, get ideas, do all of our calculations, and then ask the world, hey, are you interested in this or not? If the world says, nah, not really, and that happens quite frequently, people just are like, meh, just not enough people interested in pledging. Again, like I said, no harm, no foul. But if you can get the people, if you get the buzz, if you get people who are interested and they tell their friends and they tell their friends and they tell their friends, and all of a sudden now you've hit your goal and you start going beyond your goal, you can produce something that generally would have never been produced before. And that, for us, the tabletop gamer, can really sort of make a little bit of a renaissance in the kind of things that we can bring to the table.